And hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may happen to be reclining or declining, as some of us might perhaps be considered to be. Anyway, good to see you. I am Tad. I'm going to be here reading for a while. Sorry, I'm just trying to fix my light. But it doesn't want to fix anymore. No, now it's just getting brighter. No, we don't want to do that. Okay, there we go. Anyway, hello, good to see you. I am here. We've had another exciting, exciting day. Oh my God, the life of a big time writer. It's just so exciting. So, anyway, as you know, we're living between, not between, but we're kind of in charge of two houses at the moment. We're living at my parents' house and trying to deal with various things here. We have our other house which we were going to rent, and but then our two of our young people had to move out of their place in Eureka for various reasons, so they've come back to live at the house. That's our other house. They after we find they were having to live there without any phone coverage or anything. I mean, I'm not just talking internet, I'm talking phones because of where our house is, the one on the other side of the hill in the Santa Cruz area. Because of that, there is no phone service on top of the hill because of, well, it's not on the top. That's part of the problem. So the hill blocks a lot of the service. So we finally got that fixed and reinstalled all of that stuff, which we had just turned off a few weeks earlier. Anyway, they moved in. We got it turned back on finally after much kerfuffle. Oh my God, I am so tired of dealing with phone trees and bureaucracy and the Kafkaesque world we live in. Anyway, so they called us up to say that the stove was broken. And for some reason, the burners weren't working. And of course, we have many questions about that. It's like, oh, could it be this? Could it be that? Could it be, they've just sold our gas provider to another company and we haven't heard anything from them yet. Have they not been delivering? We don't know. So we were just getting ready to go over to that house today to find out what was going on and see what we could do to improve the situation. And meanwhile, at the house we're living at, which is my parents' old house, a bunch of the neighbors were complaining that we hadn't gotten the yard cleared out because, of course, nobody was living here for 6 months. So the front yard was a mess. Not a mess like cars up on blocks or anything. Just, the plants were all overgrown and there were some weeds and things. And some of our neighbors, not most of our neighbors are very nice and know exactly what's going on. But some of our neighbors were complaining about that. And although some of our other neighbors took them to task and pointed out that my dad had just died a couple of weeks ago, and we'd only moved in a few weeks before that, and we'd been going back and forth over the hill to the hospital with him in and out of the hospital. Anyway, but because we are basically decent people and we had wanted to do it anyway, we went ahead and got some gardeners out. So they were just finishing up a big, massive cleanup as we were getting ready to leave to drive over the hill to try to figure out what the crisis was with the stove. And they came to the door, very nice guys. They sheepishly said that they had accidentally cut through one of the water pipes. So, once again, we have no water. Oh my God. Well, we're going to get it fixed tomorrow. But it's just been like that. It's been like that. Every time I turn around, something else is falling apart, breaking, disappearing, not functioning properly. We are having to call somebody to reorder something or to complain about why we didn't get this or why is this not turned on, and et cetera, et cetera. And oh my Lord. Anyway, so that's been the kind of thing that I've been dealing with lately. Fortunately, right at this exact moment, I am not writing, although I am preparing to get back to work on the Third Ordinary Farm book, which I've mentioned to you guys, which I've had Deb's first draft for like 2 years now. It's been sitting around, and of course the book itself should have been written about 10 years ago anyway. Lord of mercy. So, I'm just doing mental work at the moment, and also I'm having some joint problems. So I'm doing mental work as much as I can, prepping to do that. Um, so it's not really impeding most of the things that I need to be doing, all this other stuff. But it's still, it's one of those things where I was just saying, as Deb and I were driving over the hill today, I was saying, it's Deb being English doesn't always know all my cultural references. So I was saying, it's always something. And I said that in the immortal words of Rosanna Dana. Well, I know a lot of you folks are in Europe and won't recognize that either, but it was a character that Gilda Radner played in the early years of Saturday Night Live back in the 70s when it first started. Gilda Radner was a very talented comedian. She was married to Gene Wilder for a number of years and sadly died of cancer. But anyway, and her character Rosanna Dana, just saying it makes me laugh. She was very funny. Rosanna Dana was always, that was her one of her catchphrases. It's always something. And that's definitely how I'm feeling this week. It's always something. So, before I jump into reading, let me see if anybody has shown up and is saying hello. And if so, I will say hello to them. And there's Isaac, top of the list. Hello, Isaac. Good to see you. Ilva, hello, darling. Good to see you. And Hazel, my mother-in-law. Hi, sweetie. Your daughter is fine. I'm taking good care of you. Take good care of her and keeping her safe for you, since we will be able to see you soon. There's my friend Jeremy as well. Hello, Jeremy. Good to see you. Holger, good to see you as well. Kristen, welcome aboard again, as always. Suzanne, good to see you, Suzanne. That is Suzanne Owen. Julian, or Julian, depending on if we're giving it the German pronunciation or not. Mr. Unangst. Okay, I always have to do that. Wouter, hello. Iris, good to see you. Winter, Rosalba, Maria Jose, and Chris checking in from Germany. Nicole, Christy Sanders, Penny Davies, Sandy K. Summer, and 3 more, it says, which tells me nothing. That gives me no useful information. Of course, I can never actually access the comments for some reason. I don't know why that is. It's just so bizarre. Anyway, but so here I am, here you are. We are all here together. That sounds like the beginning of I Am the Walrus. So let me check back. I'm not going to do a lot of talking tonight because I am exhausted after all of this craziness. Oh, mercy. But otherwise, we're doing okay. Just wanted to let everybody know that. Nobody needs to fret about us. We don't have water, but it'll be just for tonight. And unlike other times, this is not like we have no water, period. We can turn it back on. It's just that then it leaks out of the broken pipe, which we've done our best to duct tape so that it won't escape too quickly. But, so in emergencies, we can turn the water back on for a few minutes. So the problems are not as bad as they have been in other times when we were back at the other house. Because here in Palo Alto, in the suburbs in Silicon Valley, of course, we are getting water from pipes. Whereas on the hill, we were getting our water, or we do get our water, from a pump and a well. And when that shuts down, like when the power goes out, that's it. There is no other way to get water short of, well, actually, one of the times when we had our water down for several days, it was in the middle of the rainy season, and I was actually putting out pots and buckets just to catch rain so we could flush the toilets. So like I said, the glamorous world of a professional writer, you just can't beat it. I mean, I'm sure that William Faulkner never had to deal with that. Who knows? Maybe he did. Anyway, so that's where I'm at. I just buzzing with useless stuff that I've had to deal with just in a kind of a continuous barrage of things that have to be dealt with. But that's my life at the moment. So, I will I strive to find things to enjoy and appreciate, or at least be interested by. And certainly, I'm learning a lot of things about various organizations at various levels. And because we've been dealing with, we're dealing with Social Security, we're dealing with banking issues. Deb's been doing the taxes. We've been dealing with several different things to do with cable TV and phone service and internet service. And we're also struggling with Medicare and Social Security, which we've got issues that we're trying to work out with. meanwhile, I was just about to drive back from the other side of the hill, and I had been noticing something ever since we left the parking lot of the place where we had dinner. Been noticing like a strange noise, and I got out, and the whole front end of my car, which is held together by duct tape, well, Gorilla Tape to give it its proper name, if I'm going to give them a plug. With Gorilla Tape, something had caught it, or somebody had backed out and pulled it loose and ripped the front end of my car off completely. Again, it doesn't take much. It's held on with tape. So as Deb and I are getting ready to drive back, I'm literally out there in my driveway of my house, which I no longer live in, or at least not for another few months. On my knees with a roll of Gorilla Tape, taping the front end of my car back on. You just cannot beat this life for glamour. I'll tell you, you just cannot. So, any of you out there who are thinking like, wow, God, I'd like to be a professional writer, then I'd really have it made. I am what's the term for it? I am the cautionary tale. I am the cautionary tale. Yeah. Anyway, so with that, I say hello to you all and thank you for joining me. And I am going to start reading. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm reading from Brothers of the Wind. And what happened last time was Hakatri, because of not finding any relief among the Norns, had decided to go south. And so he was in Naban, which is primarily the preserve of humans, of mortals, at this point in the history of Ostenard. And but in part because of the recommendation of Lady Ona, the wife of Zaniko, the exile, Pamon Kes had kind of urged his master Hakatri to to go in search of a Tanukadaya healer. The Tanukadaya obviously are the race that Pamon belongs to, whereas the Zidaya or Sithi is what his master Hakatri is, and Hakatri's brother Inaluki, who has left them now and gone back to Azua. So that's what's going on. So Hakatri and Pamon Kes have just gone out on a boat with this sort of local witch woman, and it's turned out to be, if not a scam, certainly a bit dangerous. And they have just come back from this, and he's telling his master, Pamon Kes is telling his master about what he saw, and why he intervened in the process of this. So that's where we are. She had a piece of a witness hidden in her hand, my lord. I doubt she knew how to do anything more with it than to briefly wake the green column. But it would be a most effective way to fool mortals and those who are ignorant of history, would it not? For a moment, Hakatri sat silent. It was not all false, though, Pamon. While we floated there, a new dream came to me. A very strong dream, like no other I have had. Whether they meant to rob us or not, something true was at work. It was much like what I have felt from the Pool of Three Depths in Azua and other master witnesses. All the more reason, then, after what happened to you in Serpent's Vale, that you should be kept away from those people and their foolish use of someone else's power. Who can guess what the untutored meddling of a Niski Hedgewitch might have done to you if we had not stopped her." "I am not certain we did stop her," Hakatri said. "The dream that came to me on the boat was strong, so strong, and I still feel it. A figure stood before me, slender, pale, and distant. It spoke to me in a woman's voice, saying, 'Come to me. I have a message for you.' It was so strong and strange. It did not feel like any of the other dreams I have had since the worm's blood burned me." He lifted his hands to his face as if to make certain he was still the same person. "I no longer know what to do, Pamon, what to believe." Privily, I thought the pale female figure of his dream sounded like the Hikedaya queen, Utuku, who was known to walk the dream road as easily as others might walk the Silver Way or the Snowfields Road, sending her spirit into dark places where even the wisest of the Zidaya did not dare to go. Hearing Hakatri's fascination with this vision, I was fearful it might lead us back to dark Nakiga, but in the end our travels turned out much differently than I had imagined. We returned with my master's remaining guards and retainers to the inn on the Naban waterfront, so my master could decide what to do next. I discovered that in my absence a letter from Lady Ona had arrived for me, sent on from Azwa, along with a letter to my master from his wife. I postponed reading Ona's letter to take Lady Briseyu's message to my master's chamber. "My eyes ache, and they will not fix on anything." Hakatri had scarcely risen from his bed since our return. "Read it to me, Pamon." I unfolded the delicate silken note, feeling as much an intruder as if I roamed through the lady's chamber, grubbing among her belongings. "My husband," I read out, "I saw you yesterday in your favorite chair, drinking from a cup of black wine as you often do in the evenings. But it was not you, only your robe draped over the cushion. I saw you again today in Thousand Leaves Hall, and even called out to you, but it was only a shadow that for a moment had your shape. When I spoke your name, many turned to look at me in pity. I seek for you often in sleep these nights, upon the dream road, but when I find you, you never turn your face toward me. When I speak to you, it is as though you stand in a high place, the wind fierce in your ears, and you cannot hear me. You are a ghost, Hakatri, and I am a widow, a child, an orphan. I feel like a lost pilgrim in a strange land who kneels beside an ancient ruined fane, praying to a departed spirit that cannot hear her." "Enough," said my master, his voice full of wretchedness. "I cannot hear this now. Leave it until I may read it with my own eyes." He turned his face toward the wall. I set the letter on the bench and carried away the parchment from Raven's perch, but my heart was sore for my master and his family. "Dear Kess," my letter read, "I hope this finds you in good health, and that your master, Lord Hakatri, has found some respite from his suffering. It has been a difficult time here. During the last moon, my dear Sholi fell ill with a terrible fever." As I saw those words, my heart clutched in my chest. For a moment I could not even breathe. I hardly dared to read further, but after some moments I mustered my courage and continued. "And I feared I would lose her. I am glad to say that she has passed through the worst of it now, and appears to be on her way back to health, though she is still weak and remains in her bed. But she is eating again, and I can finally say that I feel confident she will recover. She asked me to send you her greetings and her good wishes, and I now do so. I was terrified, of course, not just for Sholi, so young and with so much life still before her, but for myself as well. As you know, I often do not see my husband from one day to the next, and, as I have no doubt made clear before, Ravensperch can be a lonely place. It is terribly selfish to say it, but I do not know what I would do without my beautiful Sholi's company. I hope that when you and your master have returned from your long journey, we may hope to see you again. You were a breath of fresh and welcome air in a house that often seems stale with overfamiliarity. Since I did not know when I would next have the chance, I wrote back to Ona that evening, hoping I could find a way to send the letter to her. I knew she would be most unhappy when she heard how our fellow No.298, the criminal Fen clan, had tried to cheat my master, so I related only the bare bones of that misadventure. I also sent my greetings and my sincere wishes for continued recovery to Lady Sholi, and suggested that any further letters the ladies wrote to me should be sent to Azua, since I felt sure we would be returning there as soon as my master was fit to travel again. Foolish Kess, or perhaps not so much foolish as unlucky. How was I to know that almost 4 seasons would roll past before we saw Azua's bright towers again, before I stood once more upon the Tanja stairs? How could anyone have guessed? As the moon spun slowly through the sky, and the season of gathering turned to the season of withering, we continued to search the southern lands for healers who might be able to help Lord Hakatri. It is a sign of how desperate we were, and how fierce my master's suffering, that he spent so much time in the lands of mortals. I doubt any other member of his clan had ever traveled so much among them, or came to know those short-lived folk so well. Some of the mortal scholars we consulted tried very hard to help us, but most seemed more interested by the chance to meet with a Zediah noble from the leading clan. In the end we did learn a few things, here and there, but I cannot say that the search was worth the effort, at least among the mortal philosophers of Naban. My master's Zediah folk scarcely sleep, but we No.298 must, and it was exhausting for me to tumble into weary slumber at the end of each long day, only to be awakened before an hour had passed by the sound of my master Hakatri's moans and harsh breathing. It is perhaps surprising for me to say it, and it was far more confounding for me to feel it, but I was beginning to weary of living with my lord's almost constant suffering. This, of course, made me feel like the worst sort of traitor. Hakatri had picked me out as a child, and allowed me to take a place in his life that would normally have been reserved for a youth of his own race. He had made me his armiger, an honor never before given to one of my people, and he had always shown me a kindness that went beyond mere condescension. Once, before my father died, Lord Hakatri even dined in our house, praised our poor fare, and complimented my father on raising such a good and helpful son. I am certain that my father must have been overwhelmed with pride to hear that, although it was not his nature to show much emotion, especially in the presence of our Zediah masters. If my father, Pamansur, had been one of the antique sort of No.298, his life devoted utterly to hard work and stolid silences, my mother, Enla, must have been a different kind. I scarcely remember her. The fatal fever took her when I was only a few summers old, but every memory I had or tale I heard of her spoke of someone who loved life in all its forms. She would come to the stables to nurse the sickly foals, even when my father told her they would not survive and she was wasting her time. Sometimes he was right, but just as often she would bring one back from the brink of death with her loving care. During my long, lonely evenings, tending my master, and sometimes during sleepless nights, I thought about my childhood and the mother I had lost. One such night, as my master struggled with his foul dreams, a memory returned to me, as if a door had been opened to the past, and I suddenly recalled what my mother had said about the dreaming sea. That day, I had been called a harsh name by one of the Zidaya children when I tried to join in their play, and I was bitterly sad. My mother took me on her lap and told me, "Do not be ashamed, Kess, by being different than the others. Some day, at a moment you most need it, you will feel the garden inside you. You will feel the heartbeat of the dreaming sea." At the time, I now remembered, my childish imagination had pictured her words as very real, and I had envisioned a great and surging flood that would burst out of me, throbbing with the living essence of the great ocean, though I had never seen the dreaming sea, of course, nor any body of water except nearby Landfall Bay. As young as I was then, her words seemed more of a warning than a reassuring promise, and perhaps that is why I gave in so readily when my father later ordered me not to ask or speak about what she said. Soon after the fever came to both of us. I recovered, but my mother, Enla, never did. During her last days, as the illness overwhelmed her, she was confined to her bed, but she had me come to her every day for at least a short while. She would ask me to share with her all the things I had seen and heard. Then we would pray to the garden together. When she finally died, I did not know what to do or even what to feel. A part of my child's mind wondered if it had been my fault, since the fever had come to me first. But that unhappiness was one of the many things I never shared with anyone else, along with my mother's words about the mysterious sea that was somehow a part of me. My father, Pamansur, must have been nearly as bereft by losing her as I was, but he had his work in the stables to occupy his thoughts. I had only the silent Tanukadaya neighbor woman who lived beside us and watched over me in his absence. This woman had no children of her own and seemed to know nothing about tending them, nor did she care to learn. My father came home late every night, exhausted and silent. I see now that he was grieving in his own way, but to me it felt as though I had been entirely abandoned. It was in this time, in the seasons after my mother's death, that I began to follow my father to the stables every day. And it was in that place that my master Hakatri first came to know me. It would not be foolish to say that in the Zidaya Lord's kindness I found something I had been desperate for, though I did not know it. It was not only his interest that saved me, but also the fact of who he was. Insignificant little Pamon Kess had been noticed by one of the most important people in all the world. It was this feeling, like a door opening to let sun and air rush into a dark, smoky room, that gave me hope for my life to mean something. After my master had questioned all the best-known mortal healers and clerics we could find in Naban, he began to seek for other sorts of wisdom, healing secrets that the city men had lost or never owned. Hakatri did not scorn all mortal knowledge, so as the moons and seasons fled past, we began to explore some of the more distant outposts of mortal men in the southern lands, the places where the earliest mortals had settled, far from the wide roads and stone walls the city folk built later. At last we began a difficult and agonizing journey into the swampy lands east of Naban in search of a wise woman whose tale my master had heard from mortal clerics. a woman who supposedly cured even the worst illnesses by secret rites. Legend said that she had been practicing her art in the depths of the swamp for well over 2 great years, more than a century by mortal count, and that gave my master hope. She must be something different than an ordinary mortal, Paimon. If the stories are true, Hakatri said one night, when his pain was so great he had awakened me to keep him company. His every word was forced out through a grimace. He had to breathe slowly and shallowly to be able to speak at all. She might be another of your own folk, Paimon, or even one of the Zedaya or Hikidaya who has fled to this backwater. His decision made, Hakatri sent his remaining guards back to Azwa with our horses, which would be no good to us in the marshes. The guards also carried letters to his family, so I was able to include my own letter meant for Lady Ona at Raven's Perch. It was only the two of us now. We made our way east to the edge of the immense swamp that mortals called the Ran, but which my master's people had much earlier named the Vast Mire. When we at last reached a place called Quan To Po, a sprawling, ramshackle settlement that had grown up beside a much-traveled estuary on the edge of the vast wetland, we hired a local guide to carry us in his boat into the depths of the swamp. After several days in the flat-bottomed craft, sliding through the damp, insect-haunted marshes, we at last reached the wise woman's village. Her name was Herma, and she was, in spite of my master's hopes, a mortal. She was also tiny, toothless, and extremely kind. She lived in a house made of wood and reeds at the edge of a wide, sluggish river. In our ignorance, my master and I had entered the swamp during the wolf moon, the beginning of the rainy season. Herma kindly let us shelter with her and her sizable family, and we lived in their house through the long season of incessant storms, as cramped and miserable an experience as you might imagine. From my first sight of it, the swampland felt far too much like Serpent's Vale for me ever to feel comfortable there. But it was a Serpent's Vale writ so large that it seemed an entire world. And the longer we spent in that wet, unpleasant place, the worse I found it, until the rain drumming on the thatched roof, or on my head when I had to leave the healer's hut, threatened to drive me mad. But once the rainy season had begun, the rivers all flooded, and we could not leave. If Herma and her family had not sheltered us, I do not think we would have survived. As it turned out, we lived almost 3 full moons among those kind people beneath those tangled trees. Vines that looked like snakes hung on nearly every branch, side by side with deadly snakes that looked like vines. Most nights our only music was the braying of apes and the incessant screeching of birds, and not only the serpents were deadly in that blighted land. In truth, some of the swamp creatures were scarcely less frightening than the worm whose blood had burned my master. Armored cock-and-drills, as long as 2 team carriages, floated in the muddy water just a stone's throw from Herma's door, and one day I saw a spotted cat as big as a pony, a sharp-toothed hunter who, the healer warned us, could climb trees and drop down silently on its victims from above. It was good that I spent most of my time in Herma's hut tending my master, because in that swamp death seemed to wait everywhere. Just during that rainy season, one of the healer's sons was nearly taken by some creature in the river. He escaped, but we never found out what had seized him. And one of her numerous grandchildren was snatched by Gants and never seen again. Many say that the earth goblins of the northern plains are dreadful to see, but they are nothing compared to Gants, which look like huge, nearly man-sized crabs, but can stand on their hind legs like apes and lived together in horrid nests made of mud and slime. But even more disturbing were the changes that overtook my master as we suffered through the long rainy season. "My dreams, Pamon," he said to me one day. He had not been able to get out of his bed that morning. "Something happened to me that night on the ocean when we floated above the green column, and it seems to grow stranger and stronger each time I sleep." "Truly, my lord?" I found that hard to believe. Hakatri had told me so many outlandish tales about his worm's blood visions that I could not imagine how these could be any more strange. "Because now something or someone is calling me," Hakatri told me when I asked. "And it is different from the other dreams, maddening as they are. This one seems more real and far more powerful. Often I see a tall, pale figure like a woman in a white robe, waiting for me." My skin crawled. "Ever since you first told me about it, I have thought that your summoner sounds like the queen of the Hikitaya." He shook his head. "I do not think it is Utuku. I see no silver mask in these dreams, and sometimes the figure is no figure at all, but more like a finger held up before me, as if in warning." "But you said the dream was calling you. How can it also be warning you?" He fell back exhausted, though the day had just begun. "I do not know, Pamon. I do not even know whether it is real or just more madness. Sometimes I feel as though the dragon's foul blood has burned all the way through me, even into my waking thoughts, as though it is destroying everything in me that existed before serpents fail." "Do not say such a thing, master." I was truly terrified. "That is only despair speaking. You are still you. If anyone knows it, I do. You are the same person, though you have suffered in a way no person ever should." His head lolled on his pallet of marsh reeds. "To tell truth, I am no longer certain I can say what is real and what is imagined. Am I speaking with you now, or with some dream, Pamon, some memory of my old life? My lord, never say such things." And even though I knew it was cruel, I reached out and took his hand. He grimaced at my touch, but I held on. "This pain is real, but so am I." I was in tears at his agony, but I clung to his fingers until he at last managed to pull away. "I am real, Lord Hakatri. Never doubt that. Still, I must find this thing that calls me," he said. "Of all the visions that have plagued me since the dragon's death, only this new dream seems to have a meaning, a point. I must find that tall, pale figure. I sense that it portends more than my own life. When I see it, I feel a great, cold emptiness, like a deep hole opening beneath me after I have already taken a step and cannot stop myself." He shivered and sat up. "Help me, my good and trusted servant. Promise you will help me learn what this dream means. I have no more claims on you. No more claims." It was all I could do not to grab at his hand again. "Master, you have every claim on me, both of loyalty and friendship. I swear I will never desert you. Never." Sadly, I had still not learned the lesson that Inaluki's pride had taught us. Lord Hakatri let out a long, ragged sigh. "North," he said. "It calls me north, Pamon, and I must follow its call." After those words, he fell back into restless sleep, leaving me to wonder what it all meant. The old healer Hurma never found a true cure for my master's afflictions, but she tried many things and at last managed to concoct a paste from the roots of swamp plants that, when spread on his wounded skin, eased his suffering somewhat. I was grateful, for we had used all our small supply of keivisha. When the rainy season finally ended and we could leave the marshlands, I gathered up our few possessions, which now included a sack full of Hurma's root bulbs. We left the healer a goodly amount of our remaining gold to repay her for her time and hospitality, then slowly made our way back through the jungle along the brackish waterways of the marshlands. Our journey north started well enough. We returned to Kwanto Po and used the last of our gold to buy new horses. The trader, seeing my master's ailing condition, tried to sell us inferior beasts, but after a lifetime in the stables of Azua tending the fairest, swiftest horses in the world, I was easily able to tell the useful ones from the hopeless. I forced the trader to sell us mounts that were, if nowhere near the quality of the horses we knew, at least capable of crossing the wide grasslands between us and home. Because I knew we were still overpaying for barely ordinary stock, I used the trader's superstitious fear of my master's kind by hinting at fairy curses if he mistreated us, and thus convinced him to give us a pair of decent saddles and other tackle for the horses as well. It hurt my heart to use the cruel mouthbit mortals favored, but these animals had never known anything else, and I had neither the time nor any moth harnesses to retrain them. My master chose the unimaginatively named Gray, while I took Boots, a chestnut with white feet and a white blaze on her nose. They are not long a part of this story, but I name them because they gave surprisingly good service, especially considering the dubious honesty of their former master. In fact, they both seemed quite pleased to leave his stable and also seemed to enjoy the care I gave them as long as we had them. Once mounted, Hakatri and I set out north beneath gray skies, across the seemingly endless grassy plain the Zedaya called the Whisper Waste. I hoped that we were heading home, but I was to be disappointed, at least for quite some time. The heaviest storms had passed, but at that time of the year the mist still hung over the grasslands late into the day, only burning off when the sun was high. But the sky seldom lost its blanket of heavy overcast, so that we seemed to ride through a world without color. Occasional rains still swept across the flat plains, turning the meadows to mud and slowing our progress considerably. But nothing could hold back my master's dreams. "It is hard to rest," Hakatri told me one night as we sat by the fire I had made. We never rode much past twilight because our mounts were not as sure-footed as Zedaya horses, and we feared one of them might break a leg in the dark. "It is only while we travel north that this feeling of being tugged along subsides a little." "But we are traveling north, my lord." "Whatever summons me does not cease its call when we stop for the night, Pamon. It pulls at me every moment." I could only shrug. Now that I was Hakatri's last and only servant, the journey was wearing on me badly. I cared for the horses, made a fire every night when we stopped, foraged for food and prepared a meal for the two of us, then took the roots Hurma had given us and crushed them into a paste to spread on my master's wounds, while he recovered from the agony of the day's ride. At the end of each evening I would fall into helpless, exhausted sleep, until the thin light of grassland morning woke me to my duties again. I did not know then that those were to be the most comfortable days of that journey. But during the first days crossing the Whisper Waste, things seemed almost hopeful. All around us the approaching season of renewal was turning the grasslands a vital green. My master found enough relief in old Hurma's root salve that he could sit in his saddle and ride, and could even sleep sometimes without the terrifying dreams that had punished him since he killed the blackworm. His mother's word of preservation doubtless had a part in that as well, and some days it almost seemed as if the old days before Serpent's Veil had returned. I sang songs for my master, ancient ones that I knew he liked, though he laughed and told me that I mangled the old words terribly. I could almost convince myself that things were slowly returning to what they had been, that Lord Hakatri and I would make our way north across the grasslands and be back in Azua before renewal had given way to the season of growing. Then, as we rode deeper into the Whisper Waste, the wise woman's root salve stopped working. It did not happen suddenly, but once it began, it was impossible to ignore. The easing of Hakatri's terrible pains no longer lasted as long, nor did the pace soothe the agony as much as it previously had. As the days passed, each one as empty as the flat, grassy landscape around us, we used more and more of the salve, so that I spent at least an hour every night pounding down the next day's supply into something that could be rubbed gently on his scarred flesh. The sack of roots was fast emptying, but even if we had turned then and rode straight for Azua, we would have run out long before we got there. My master even considered a return to the swamps for more of the soothing medicament, but I pointed out to him that with just the two of us and our horses, even if we went back and filled our saddlebags to the top, we would never be able to carry enough to cross all the Whisper Waste before it ran out again. "So, then, what do you suggest, Armiger Pamon?" he demanded. "That I just lie down here to die?" The anger in his voice and the glint in his eye frightened me. In all our time together, my master had never spoken to me in that way before. For a moment it felt as though I looked at a stranger. "You are always so full of wisdom when I do not need your suggestions," he said. "Where is that wisdom now?" And Hakatri actually lifted his hand as if to strike me. When I started back with a cry of surprise, he realized what he had done, and his face crumpled in horror. "Forgive me, good Pamon," he cried. "I scarcely know what I am doing or saying sometimes. The pain has returned. I am on fire. It never stops, not even when I sleep. But still that pale figure commands my dreams and calls me onward. I have no other hope now but to follow the summons and pray that it signifies some possibility of salvation." In truth, Hakatri grew increasingly strange as we crossed the grasslands, even before Hurma's salve stopped working. The scars on my master's chest and belly and arms had lost some of their furious redness, but if the pain had subsided a very small amount, other aspects had grown worse. Several times during our journey I woke from sleep to find him hobbling back and forth across our campsite in darkness, swiping with thunderstroke his sharp witchwood sword, muttering and moaning. The first time I thought he might be practicing, using the night hours when we did not travel to keep himself in some kind of fighting trim, and I only rolled farther away and went back to sleep. But when it happened again, and I listened to what he was saying, it became clear to me that he was sleepwalking, or rather sleep-fighting. This, of course, frightened me, because even wounded and limping, my master was a deadly hand with a blade, and if his dreams caused him to mistake me for an enemy, I knew I would stand little chance. When he finally woke to something like his ordinary mood, I asked him about the dream, and he told me he had been fighting Hidohebi. "I stabbed it and stabbed it," he said, "just as I did in Serpent's Vale, but the monster would not die." I did not bother to remind him that he had killed the dragon with a great spear made of a witchwood tree. Another night I woke up when Hakatri violently lifted me off the ground. For a moment, in my confusion and fear, I thought my master would break my back, but it soon became clear he thought I was his brother Inaluki, and that he believed I had been killed by the worm of Serpent's Vale. He cried out so loudly and mournfully that I feared wolves or bandits would come to see what made so much noise in the middle of the empty grassland. And all through our travel across the grasslands, that mysterious but powerful summoning, the tall white shape, came to him again and again, generally during his fitful sleeps, but even sometimes when he was awake. The Whisper Waste is a strange place, and our time crossing those wild lands was strange too. My master sometimes seemed to have a purpose firmly in mind, but at other moments he would ask me where we were going and why, and seemed distressed when I told him that he was the one leading us, not I. As we journeyed, we met a few of the mortals who lived on that monstrously empty plain, herding folk for the most part, traveling in family groups. The men let their chin whiskers grow long and rode on small, strong ponies. These folks could draw their bows and loose arrows from horseback better than most mortals could manage while standing on firm ground. They roamed from one side of the wide grasslands to the other, according to the season, following their cattle and sheep. And though we did not see many of them, those we saw were generally cautious of us, or outright fearful, but did not offer us harm. A few of these mortals even warned us to be wary of any company of solely male riders, since the grasslands were also a refuge for outlaws, thieves, and murderers. One day, early in renewal, we were beset by bandits in truth, although it was not one of my master's loud nightmares that called them down on us. Nearly a dozen riders spotted us from far away in late afternoon. My master saw them first, of course, and steadily narrowed the distance between us as the sun slipped down the sky. Their first mistake was to attack us as soon as they were close enough, which happened to be just after the sun had set and twilight was fading. I doubt they had ever met any Zediah before, and it is likely they did not know how much better my master could see in near darkness than they could. Their second mistake was to take my master's slumped posture and obvious discomfort for the signs of an easy target. In fact, when they closed on us in the darkening evening, it was me that they avoided in order to attack him first, which would have made me laugh when I realized it had I not been so terrified. These two errors alone were enough to doom them, but they still might have won the day if they had only used their bows while they were still far away from us. My master had his own bow, but they could have overcome him if they had all shot at once. Instead, one or two loosed their shafts, but those seemed meant only to keep us from escaping as they made a thundering rush in our direction, curved swords slashing the air over their heads. My master killed 3 of them with arrows in moments. Then he unsheathed his sword and spurred toward them. I kicked my heels against my own horse's sides and turned back to fight beside him. I took the hand off one of the whiskered attackers. His look of indignant shock was almost comical, as though I had mistaken some kindness he planned, and saw him tumble out of his saddle. But before I could even reach the next bandit, my master had killed one of them and wounded another, wielding Thunderstroke as swiftly and devastatingly as the lightning for which it was named. Within moments, as the bloody mist of the last killing still drifted down through the air, excuse me, the remaining bandits gave up their attack and veered away. They turned in their saddles as they retreated and loosed arrows toward us, but we were lucky, or they were too frightened to aim well. None of their bolts came close to us. I hurried to my master to thank him. I was very certain that if I had been with any less dangerous warrior, I would have been killed, but had a frightening moment as I caught up with him. He was bent low in Gray's saddle, gasping. It was only as I reached out to him and he violently drew back that I realized he had not been struck by a stray arrow, but was overcome entirely by his exertions. It had been a long time since I had seen him so helpless, and as I watched, he half slid, half tumbled out of the saddle and onto the ground. I quickly dismounted and pulled the last root paste from my saddlebag. I set a fire and heated a clean stone as quickly as I could. When the stone had begun to crack with the heat, I picked it out of the fire with sticks and dropped it into our cooking pot so the water would boil, then used the hot water to soften the root paste. When it had cooled, I took it to Lord Hakatri. When he finally recognized me, he allowed me to daub the root salve on his wounds. The night grew darker as I waited, but my master stayed huddled on the ground. At last, as the moon drifted up into the sky, he stirred and sat up. Even by moonlight, I could see the fear in his eyes. I thought that time the worm's blood dream would not end, he told me. Faithful Paimon, I thank you. I do not know what I would do without your loyalty and help. I owe you more than I can ever repay. I flinched at that. Such talk turned things upside down. I did not want to live in a world where my master was so weak, so pitiful. It was against the order of everything I had ever known. I am your servant, was all I said, but I had become strangely uncertain what serving him truly meant. Okay, I'm going to read this last little section here. One night, deep in the unmapped reaches of the Whisper Waste, I dreamt that I was on fire, but it did not feel like a dream. I woke up, shrieking and squirming, trying with flapping hands to beat out the flames that I could feel running up my limbs, only to realize that those flames were not real. But they had been real, or at least they had truly felt that way. Even as I crouched beneath the stars and the stretching night sky, the pain was still alive in me, an agony like flayed skin, an attack on my wits as terrible as an endless scream. When, after a dozen heartbeats or so, the torture finally began to ease and I could catch my breath, I saw that my master had sat up and was staring at me with wide eyes. "What is it, Paimon?" I do not know, my lord." I struggled for air. "It felt as if someone threw boiling oil on my skin. It was only a dream, I suppose, but it seemed to continue even after I woke." "I am so sorry." The look on Hakatri's face was grim, but at that moment I did not understand it. My heart was beating so fast it made my chest ache, and my lungs were still short of air. It was a long time before I dared to let myself fall asleep again. And that's where we're going to stop for the evening. And assuming that we are still... Anthony asks, what book is this from? This is from Brothers of the Wind, gigantic Last King of Ostenard project. Anyway, so with that, I am going to wrap it up for the evening. Thank you for joining me. Sorry my voice gets a little raspy, especially at this time of the night.
But I appreciate your patience. And I am grateful as always to share some time with you. So I will be reading again at 7 p.m. I will also be reading, as far as I know, next week. And then I think the week after that, I'm going to be out of town for a couple of weeks. I'll have to check the dates and stuff, but I believe that's correct. And if I'm not literally out of town, it may be busy enough that it's just not worth trying to squeeze in a reading while I'm literally packing to get out the door. But I will be back next week, so I will be here 7 o'clock tonight, reading more, and then I will be back next week at 1 a.m. and 7 p.m. again. I am pretty darn sure. So, anyway, again, thank you. Pleasure to share time with you. Take good care of yourself, your loved ones, your friends and neighbors. Help people when you can, and pay it forward. And that's how it works. And with that, don't have really much else to say except peace and good night. And thank you for joining me.